Tapi ini penghasilannya merosot aja, nggak ada yang membeli.
Biasanya kalau puasa gini lumayan harganya. Kalau ini bukan lagi ada ini dan corona, ada penurunan gitu.
Gimana makannya? Mau mitra, mau beli pakaian anak-anak.
Seperti kayak pedagang-pedagang, Masya Allah pada mengeluh. Teman-teman saya jualan angsongan udah pada nganggur, pada ngeluh lah. Ya harapan ke depan ya mudah-mudahan alhamdulillah pada lancar usahanya. Pemerintah harus pada ngerti sama rakyat-rakyat nuletik gitulah.
Hello my friend, I'm Reza Novianto A.S from the Management Department of Ma'arif University. I was asked by Bu Fitri to present the coronavirus in 2021. This is my presentation. Let's go. Access to critical information and better understanding about the new strain of coronavirus disease or COVID-19 is pivotal during the current evolving outbreak. Training can help limit the spread of mission and rumor among the public. As the support, the medical professional WHO manage painting at the front line. The global WHO or Health Emergency Program has been investing in learning and training opportunities to strengthen preparedness and real-time emergency response to the international outbreak, and has recently launched several informative training modules about COVID-19 on its platform in Inggris and Bahasa Indonesia. The course Infection and Control or IPC for novel coronavirus COVID-19 is a three-part series providing preparedness information on how health facility can respond to a case of COVID-19, including the correct IPC measures to ensure there is not future virus transmission to healthcare workers, other parties, and victorious in the factory model consists of a mixture of video and downloadable presentation. Which in the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak in Europe. The death toll at the end of March stood at 11%. Meanwhile, in neighboring Germany, the death rate from the same virus is only 1%. In China, the figure is 4%. Okay, in the following, I will show
This is SARS-CoV-2. It belongs to the family of coronaviruses named for the crown-like spikes on their surfaces. SARS-CoV-2 can cause COVID-19, a contagious viral infection that attacks primarily your throat and lungs. What actually happens in your body when you contract the coronavirus? What exactly causes your body to develop pneumonia? And how would a vaccine work? The coronavirus must infect living cells in order to reproduce. Let's have a closer look. Inside the virus, genetic material contains the information to make more copies of itself. A protein shell provides a hard protective enclosure for the genetic material as the virus travels between the people it infects. An outer envelope allows the virus to infect cells by merging with the cell's outer membrane. Projecting from the envelope are spikes of protein molecules. Both a typical influenza virus and the new coronavirus use their spikes like a key to get inside a cell in your body, where it takes over the cell's internal machinery, repurposing it to build the components of new viruses. When an infected person talks, coughs, or sneezes, droplets carrying the virus may land in your mouth or nose and then move into your lungs. Once inside your body, the virus comes in contact with cells in your throat, nose, or lungs. One spike on the virus inserts into a receptor molecule on your healthy cell membrane like a key in a lock. This action allows the virus to get inside your cell. A typical flu virus would travel inside a sac made from your cell membrane to your cell's nucleus that houses all its genetic material. The coronavirus, on the other hand, doesn't need to enter the host cell nucleus. It can directly access parts of the host cell called ribosomes. Ribosomes use genetic information from the virus to make viral proteins, such as the spikes on the virus's surface. A packaging structure in your cell then carries the spikes in vesicles which merge with your cell's outer layer, the cell membrane. All the parts needed to create a new virus gather just beneath your cell's membrane. Then, a new virus begins to bud off from the cell's membrane. Now, with the virus spreading in your body, how can you develop pneumonia symptoms? For this, we'll have to look into your lungs. Each lung has separate sections called lobes. Normally, as you breathe, air moves freely through your trachea or windpipe, then through large tubes called bronchi, through smaller tubes called bronchioles, and finally into tiny sacs called alveoli. Your airways and alveoli are flexible and springy. When you breathe in, each air sac inflates like a small balloon. And when you exhale, the sacs deflate. Small blood vessels called capillaries surround your alveoli. Oxygen from the air you breathe passes into your capillaries, and then carbon dioxide from your body passes out of your capillaries into your alveoli so that your lungs can get rid of it when you exhale. Your airways catch most germs in the mucus that lines your trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles. In a healthy body, hair-like cilia lining the tubes constantly push the mucus and germs out of your airways, where you might expel them by coughing. Normally, cells of your immune system attack viruses and germs that make it past your mucus and cilia and enter your alveoli. However, if your immune system is weakened, like in the case of a coronavirus infection, the virus can overwhelm your immune cells, and your bronchioles and alveoli become inflamed as your immune system attacks the multiplying viruses. The inflammation can cause your alveoli to fill with fluid, making it difficult for your body to get the oxygen it needs. You could develop lobar pneumonia, where one lobe of your lungs is affected, or you could have bronchopneumonia that affects many areas of both lungs. Pneumonia may cause difficulty breathing, chest pain, coughing, fever and chills, confusion, headache, muscle pain, and fatigue. It can also lead to more serious complications. Respiratory failure occurs when your breathing becomes so difficult that you need a machine called a ventilator to help you breathe. These are the machines that save lives and that medical device companies currently ramp up production for. Whether you would develop these symptoms depends on a lot of factors, such as your age and whether you already have an existing condition. While this all sounds scary, the push to develop a coronavirus vaccine is moving at high speed. Studies of other coronaviruses led most researchers to assume that people who have recovered from a SARS-CoV-2 infection could be protected from reinfection for a period of time. But that assumption needs to be backed by empirical evidence, and some studies suggest otherwise. There are several different approaches for a potential vaccine against the coronavirus. The basic idea is that you would get a shot that contains faint versions of the virus. The vaccine would expose your body to a version of the virus that is too weak to cause infection, but just strong enough to stimulate an immune response. Within a few weeks, cells in your immune system would make markers called antibodies, which would be specific for only the coronavirus, or specifically its spike protein. Antibodies then attach to the virus and prevent it from attaching to your cells. Your immune system then responds to signals from the antibodies by consuming and destroying the clumps of viruses. If you then catch the real virus at a later stage, your body would recognize it and destroy it. In other words, your immune system is now primed. Collecting evidence on whether this will be possible, safe, and effective is part of what's taking researchers so long to develop a vaccine. It's a race against time to develop a vaccine amid a pandemic. Each step in vaccine development usually takes months, if not years. An Ebola vaccine broke records by being ready in 5 years. The hope here is to develop one for the new coronavirus in a record-breaking 12 to 18 months. While all of this will take time, stay home if you can, to protect the most vulnerable. And don't forget to wash your hands for at least 20 seconds and as often as possible. This video was a collaboration between Nucleus Medical Media and the What If channel, where we usually dive into hypothetical scenarios about the human body, humanity, our planet, and the cosmos. Check out our channel by visiting the link in the description below.
As a result, the current figures are both importable between countries. He said, this is because in order to get the current figures across the population, it is necessary to test not only symptomatic entities, but also asymptomatic people. Giving such data will provide an accurate picture of how this pandemic is impacting the entire population, not just a portion of the population that is sick. Currently, we have very large bias in data from different countries. Therefore, the data cannot be compared. He said, we will need to get valid and comparable data and to find a clear and systematic way to select a representative sampling first. I will explain the health protocol to avoid the coronavirus. Step 1. Use mask when going to public place. Step 2. Always to use a hand sanitizer when shaking hands. So many presentation from me. If you have any question, please give me a minute to ask. have a cover video, hopefully useful for all of you.
There's a lot of information out right now about the coronavirus. It's safe to say almost everyone in the world is worried about either contracting or spreading the virus. It can be terrifying for an average healthy person. But what about those who are high risk?
And the people who get into trouble, namely who need to be hospitalized, some of whom need intensive care, are very heavily weighed towards elderly people and those with underlying conditions, chronic heart disease, chronic lung disease, kidney disease, diabetes.
But why is diabetes on that list when coronavirus is described as a respiratory illness?
The WHO and the CDC putting out a blanket statement that people with diabetes are at a higher risk, I think is very scary to people, and I don't know that it fully paints the real picture of what's happening here.
Actor Tom Hanks, who has type 2 diabetes, was diagnosed with the virus, bringing even more attention and concern for those living with diabetes.
As a type 1 diabetic, I've been sheltering in place, but I'm still anxious as to why I'm at higher risk than everyone else. So we wanted to explore, why is coronavirus more dangerous for diabetics?
Diabetes is a complicated disease. There are different types and many ways to treat it. In 2019, 463 million adults were living with the disease globally. When someone has diabetes, their body's ability to produce insulin is impaired or completely stops. Type 1 diabetics make no insulin at all and need to inject it. Type 1 makes up 10% of those who are living with diabetes globally. The more common type is type 2. This could mean the body doesn't use insulin properly or make enough. It has many forms of treatment that could include medication, diet, exercise, and many need to start insulin injections.
Either form come with high blood sugar, and high blood sugar can make people more susceptible to other illnesses. And this is a big concern with people with diabetes, is that people with higher blood sugar levels could be more susceptible to coronavirus.
Managing diabetes isn't as simple as taking insulin. A lot of other factors come into play.
That's probably one of the few topics that make the coronavirus different in people with diabetes, assuming the immune system is the same, is that we have to deal with the blood sugars.
Many things influence how blood sugar rises and falls. Some are obvious, like the amount of carbs digested and correctly dosing insulin to the amount of carbs eaten. But there's also exercise, stress. Just sitting out in the sun too long can have dramatic effects. Keeping blood sugars in range reduces the high risk of contracting coronavirus, but the chance of getting sick is still as likely as the average person. We spoke to a type 1 diabetic who was recently diagnosed with the coronavirus.
I started feeling symptoms, like slight symptoms Sunday night. I had been at my girlfriend's Sunday and Monday. That's when we saw the 103 fever, I think. And she took me to the doctors where they gave me an antibiotic and an antiviral. The next night, my fever had gone up to 103, and by the Wednesday morning at like 5 or 6, I was 93 and sweating. So we decided to call 911. They took me to a hospital, but because of the type 1, I think that's why they admitted me to the ICU and tested me.
Patrick is a 30-year-old type 1 diabetic with well-controlled blood sugars. We spoke to him 5 days after testing positive for the coronavirus. Luckily, he is now recovered, but because of his diabetes, he was put in the intensive care unit for 2 nights.
Yesterday was the first day I woke up without like a headache and everything, and I pretty much feel the same today. I haven't had a fever. I've been monitoring my temperature. My cough is small. I feel good.
The American Diabetes Association states, people with diabetes are not more likely to get COVID-19 than the general population. The problem people with diabetes face is primarily a problem of worse outcomes, not greater chance of contracting the virus.
One of the things, particularly very high blood sugar levels, suppress your immune system and make people more susceptible to infection. And we see this, obviously, for example, with wound healing, with diabetes that has gone on for a long time or has high levels of blood sugar. So this is a concern when you have a novel infection like corona. People with diabetes are obviously concerned.
Illness is a very common reason for elevated blood sugars. If you're sick with the flu or the coronavirus, the lack of appetite, sleep, and just the stress of sickness make it harder to manage your diabetes.
If you have chronically elevated blood sugar levels, let's say over 200, not just one time, I'm talking about months and months and months, then your immune system just doesn't work that well. The antibodies that usually attack foreign bodies just don't work as well. And so those folks are more susceptible, but the actual immune system is exactly the same.
In type 2 diabetes, there's this kind of chronic pro-inflammatory situation that underlines the type 2 diabetes. And in this kind of chronic low-grade pro-inflammatory state that patients with type 2 diabetes have, ultimately the response to an infection may be somewhat delayed and modified. And that modification is unfavorable typically with an inadequate immune response to, say, agents like the COVID-19 virus.
The coronavirus could also affect the $24 billion insulin market. Before the pandemic sent shockwaves through the economy, millions of diabetics were facing a crisis: the price and the availability of insulin.
The number one concern I hear in the diabetes community, it's actually even beyond infection, is access to insulin. A person with diabetes type 1 can essentially go just a day or two without insulin at the most. And diabetes was a fatal disease before insulin. The good news is the manufacturers are stating publicly that the supply chain is safe right now. Another part of that is people are insecure about their employment right now. And in the United States, if you're under or unemployed, you may lose insurance coverage. And insulin is too expensive. That's another story that was in the news quite a bit before this happened, but it's still a problem.
Because of the high price of insulin in the United States, some diabetics have turned to Canada to get it at a lower cost. But now that the border is closed, it creates yet another hurdle for people to find cheaper options. The two biggest manufacturers of insulin, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, both stated that they have policies in place for long-term supplies of insulin and plans for those who can't afford it.
I mean, we absolutely need to keep our business running for our patients. If we were to quit manufacturing product and eat into all the stock that we have and wake up one day with no product, in a time of need like that, that would just be horrible. So we feel a very, very important responsibility to do that.
Dexcom manufactures continuous glucose monitors that allow users to see their blood sugar 24/7. The company said it had close to 650,000 patients using its CGM at the end of 2019.
I don't think there's ever been a more important time for somebody to keep themselves within a very narrow band of glucose control. And the only way to do that is with the sensors. People need this product, so we've kept our manufacturing operations open.
At the moment, everything seems to be running smoothly, but the uncertainty about how long this will go on is making lots of diabetics concerned for their future.
A big concern about having diabetes and with the coronavirus situation, being quarantined at home, or at least trying to stay away from everybody is, do you have enough medication? You got to have insulin, you got to have the pills if you have type 2 diabetes.
Pharmacies like Walgreens and CVS remain open and have waived their delivery fees. There are also smaller businesses stepping up to help get medicine to those in need.
Here's what 90 days of supplies looks like for me. This will keep me alive for the next 3 months. Some diabetics live day to day and week to week on supplies, so it's incredibly important that manufacturers and pharmacies stay open during this time.
The biggest takeaway for any diabetic is to do your best to avoid getting sick. The American Diabetes Association says diabetics are not more likely to get the virus, but will struggle in recovery if they do.
If you look at people who died that we've had reported in the medical literature from COVID-19 virus at this time, diabetes didn't independently stand out. In one study, it was suggestive, but in another study, it was patients who were older with diabetes who also had coronary heart disease.
We are really trying to reassure people with diabetes in a time of incredible fear. You can imagine this is a pandemic like we've never seen before. People with diabetes live with a chronic disease that puts them at risk for complications that can be serious. And what we're trying to do is get information out there. It starts with the fundamentals. Stay as healthy as possible. Isolate, distance, wash your hands. I live with type 1, as does my brother. Taking care of ourselves now is as important as it's ever been.
Okay, Nati, I'm sorry if there a mistake my work. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Why you always in the mood? Mess around like I'm brand new. I ain't tryna tell you what to do, but try to play it cool. Baby, I ain't playing by your rules. Everything look better with a view. Why you always in the mood? Mess around like I'm brand new. I ain't tryna tell you what to do, but try to play it cool. Baby, I ain't playing by your rules. Everything look better with a view. Why you always in the mood? Mess around like I'm brand new. I ain't tryna tell you what to do, but try to play it cool. Baby, I ain't playing by your rules. Everything look better with a view. Why you always in the mood? Mess around like I'm brand new. I ain't tryna tell you what to do, but try to play it cool. Baby, I ain't playing by your rules. Everything look better with a view. Why you always in the mood? Mess around like I'm brand new. I ain't tryna tell you what to do, but try to play it cool. Baby, I ain't playing by your rules. Everything look better with a view. Why you always in the mood? Mess around like I'm brand new. I ain't tryna tell you what to do, but try to play it cool. Baby, I ain't playing by your rules. Everything look better with a view. Why you always in the mood? Mess around like I'm brand new. I ain't tryna tell you what to do, but try to play it cool. Baby, I ain't playing by your rules. Everything look better with a view. Why you always in the mood? Mess around like I'm brand new. I ain't tryna tell you what to do, but try to play it cool. Baby, I ain't playing by your rules. Everything